I want to talk about money, greed, and obedience. When I was in church this morning, I was listening to a couple of missionaries that are about to go over to India talk about issues with Indian culture and idol worship and all this stuff. And I thought, if you were to think about every culture, what does each culture suffer from? Well, I'm telling you right now, the West suffers from faithlessness and greed, the love of money. That's not to say that obviously Indian culture suffers from that too. Almost everywhere you have in the world suffers from the love of money. It's the love of the world. That's what the love of money is. If you go back to some previous recording, I may not have uploaded it. I talk about how a situation that many guys will find themselves in during life, and I think they go through this to understand from God's perspective about how people and their priorities tell you how much they value you. And so if a girl just puts you in kind of second or third on her list and goes for some other guy, and let's say this guy's really trashy, just really trashy, how does that make you feel knowing that they just considered or they just chose something? It makes you feel less than trash, but you understand that's just their perspective and their inability to value well. They're bad at making choices. But the point is, that was the choice that they made. They made foolish choices. And so they made the bed, and they need to sleep in the bed that they made. And you're under no obligation to wait around for somebody who has not made you a priority. I know there's memes out there about that. Don't make anybody a priority. That just makes you an option. It's very true. But the point is, they had a choice to make, and they chose something other than you. So you're going to go about your business and go about your life, and they're going to go with Mr. Trashy Dude. And that's how it is. And this is so you can understand God's perspective, that if you choose this world, which is meaningless, empty, and just trash. This world is trash. It has disease. It has sadness. It has death. This world is trash. If you would choose this world over God, you deserve this world. And you've made your bed there. But if you choose God, you choose heaven, that's where you're going. Priorities. The love of the world is seen through the love of money, almost always. That way, no matter what culture you have or what idols they worship or what false religion they practice, it doesn't matter. They seem to always suffer from the love of the world. And it would seem that one of my callings in life is to try to separate people from their love of the world so that they can love God. I seem like one of the least qualified people to talk about how to love God, considering how much difficulty and sadness I've gone through in my life. But I know this is true. Okay? And I know what Jesus taught. And he taught that you cannot have two masters. You will eventually betray one for the other. He says you cannot serve both God and money. If you have people in a church, in a mission field, it doesn't matter where they are. If they cannot let go of money, they do not serve God. That's right. They will most likely be one of those people that calls Jesus their Lord, says, Lord, Lord, didn't I teach in your name? Didn't I prophesy in your name? One of the blessings in disguise about having lost my mom at the age of 21 and then losing my dogs, 2 of them 3 years ago and then 1 last June, my last one. One of the blessings of that is it has definitely woken me up to the ugliness of this world, and it has shown me that all that matters is heaven. That's all that matters. What is the meaning of life? To go to heaven. What is the purpose of this world? This is where life begins, but it's not necessarily where life ends. This is where life begins, and the meaning of life is to go to heaven. What is heaven? Heaven is how God feels about you. If He loves you, it feels great. It's what you would call heaven. And if He doesn't love you, if He doesn't like you, it's going to feel pretty bad. How God feels about you is your place in heaven. And people who love this trashy world over Him are going to... Man, they made their choice. Don't be that fool. What good is it a man to gain the whole world but to lose his soul? Now, if you want to remove God from the equation and be an atheist, you haven't fixed anything. Sorry. You still struggle with the meaninglessness of the world, the futility of this world. You go from one good feeling to the next, but you realize it's all going to come to an end at some point, and you were a fool because you did not value the meaning of this life, which was to go to heaven. So simply removing God out of the situation and not thinking about there being a heaven or not, it's a very foolish choice. I'm sure a skeptic out there would say, well, your assumption is that there is a God and there's a heaven, but if there isn't, man, you're missing out. I got news for you. We're all screwed. If there's no God and if there's no heaven, we are all screwed. And strangely enough, the person that had hope and faith from your view, this meaningless life, actually had a better life, believe it or not. They didn't feel the sting of death when loved ones die. Because they believe, that they will see them again. That's how I got through the loss of my dogs. That's how I got through the loss of my mom. Well, to be fair, I went through a very long agnostic period after I lost my mom, but later. I came to believe that. I chose to believe that. That's what faith is, choosing to believe. So back to the subject, the love of money. I have the life experience I've had living under a greedy dad. When I was in my 20s, I gave every dollar I made to him. Every dollar I made. I had a $9 to $10 an hour job. It was 10 before I left it. I was a $9 to $10 an hour job for the last 6.5 years I was out there. I gave him every penny. And I had to take my rent down from $800 to $600 just so I wouldn't be negative. So I would basically break even. I lost my job, so I lost my income. He raised the rent rate. I could not afford it. I got these two nasty roommates, and they were nasty people, man. I had to get whoever first knocked on the door because of how quickly my dad was willing to push me out of the house. My childhood home, the only home I've ever known, I lived there for 18 years, 10 years as a kid, and then about 8 years as an adult, actually. And I just had to get some kind of roommate and some kind of income in there. Couldn't be picky. And man, it stunk, literally. He kept raising the rate. I was just waiting for a settlement from my employer. I was not fired rightly. And there was a lot of stuff to that. But basically, I got a $15,000 settlement. And I think $3,000 of that went to the lawyer. And then the other $12,000 I used to buy a trailer in Kentucky for $9,400. And the rest was for moving expenses, the moving truck and everything, to just move all my stuff out there. So basically my dad, I took every penny that I had as I worked for him like a dog, these terrible jobs, made nothing for it, it was slavery. That's why I said rent is slavery. Rent is immoral. It's slavery. One person works and the other person gets the fruit of their labor. That's slavery. And they have to work and work and work, and they'll never be able to rest because they don't ever have a home because they have slave quarters. They don't have a home, they have slave quarters. And so I did that in my 20s, and I was tired of it. I was sick of it. I lived under the boot of my dad's greed. Now, every dollar I gave him, he didn't need. He had multiple properties, all paid off. He married a doctor wife. He had plenty of money. Okay? And they blew so much money going on trips to Holland, flushing it down a cruise toilet. And so pretty much all of my labor was going down cruise ship toilets is where my money was going to. I paid, I think, up to about more than $60,000 on the house. Now, he bought the house for $100,000 back in the 80s. And that's about how much I paid towards the house in rent. I, of course, didn't see a dollar of that and never saw a dollar of help through the hard times. He evicts me, or he begins the eviction process, even though he already knows I won my settlement and I'm just waiting for the check so I can leave. He's already starting the eviction process. Okay? I end up having to say goodbye to my home and everything I've ever known, and that was very hard. I'm going to try not to get emotional. I'm going to try to stay focused on this. But that was very hard. My two dogs, Jenna and Toby, I had for the first 5.5 years of their life from puppyhood when Toby was just 3 months old. And when Jenna was 6 months old, that's where I raised them. That's where I grew up as a kid. And having to say goodbye to that house, especially being kicked out, was, especially when he was mad because he wanted $800 a month on his paid off house that he, by the way, never had to pay for because this other guy, Steve, paid rent on it the whole time. After I moved out when I was a freshman in high school, from then until into my 20s, a guy named Steve basically paid the mortgage for my dad. That was basically gifted to him by a guy named Steve, which he gave Steve the boot the moment I needed somewhere to be. I just lost my mom. He said, "Hey, Daniel, would you want to rent the Marina Valley house?" I was with a guy named Scott. Scott was a roommate who was living with us. He said, "If Scott pays $400 and you pay $400, would you want to live in the Marina Valley house?" I said, "Yeah." Well, problem is Scott bailed just a month and a half after I got there, and then he expected $800, even though my original agreement was $400 for me and $400 for him. And he expected me, like a rental property company, to find another roommate, and until then pay $800. Well, I did that for a little bit, and as I went more and more negative, I basically ran out of money. I took it down to $600 because I didn't have any more money. And I don't think he's never ran out of money, so he doesn't understand what that is like when your bank account is under $100. He has never known that. Even when I had to file bankruptcy and I talked to him about that, I asked him a question about it. He goes, "I don't know. I wouldn't know. I've never had to do that." I was like, "You are right. You have never had a hard day in your life, have you?" And so anyway, yeah, I had to take the rate from $800 down to $600. He was mad about that. He held a grudge. He was actually counting the dollars because later on he was talking about planning to sue me for all that money that I chose to not pay him, that I underpaid him, is what he said. But it was back up to $800 when he was threatening the eviction. I figured, you know what, I'll give him the extra $200 for this remainder months until I can just get the heck out of here. I can't be homeless in these last couple months with, at the time, 3 dogs then. Faith, the little dog, is the one who came into my life last couple months. So I just figured, but then he kept raising it to $1,400. It was just ridiculous. I didn't even have $1,400 in my bank account. I finally make it to Kentucky. I have a point to this story. I'm getting to it. I finally make it to Kentucky into a $9,000 trailer with $300 left in my pocket and no job. My dad has had this house that was gifted to him by renters, slavery, and he has it paid off. He sells it for $260,000 2.5 years after I leave the house. It was vacant for 2.5 years. He didn't even have to rent the thing out. It was vacant for 2.5 years. And it actually got broken into. If I was still living there, it would not have been broken into, but it was broken into and they stole the appliances. But for 2.5 years, it was vacant. I wouldn't have even had to pay rent. I could have saved money up during that time to try to maybe move somewhere nicer than a $9,000 trailer, but it is what it is. I was given the dad that I was to learn the lessons I had to learn about greed, not being able to share, selfishness, and the love of the world. Not only will a person choose to love the world over God, they'll choose to love the world over their friends, their family. It's sick, and I have had to live under that my whole life. It's ugly, too, to be on the receiving end of that. It's literally a message that tells you, I don't care if you die in a ditch, give me my money. And it's your dad. It's your family member. It is one of the reasons why I suffer from paranoia, as the psychiatrist or psychologist or whatever, psychiatrist I think is what they're called, said. The betrayal, he knew about my whole story, my whole life story. He knew about all this stuff. He explained that when you have a close family member like a dad, like that treats you like this, he called it a form of abuse. That, this kind of betrayal, it causes you to then second guess people's motives and everything, and you don't really fully trust anybody anymore by that point. I'm like, wow, you hit it on the head, because that's why I had difficulties at lots of different jobs too. I would get paranoid that someone was trying to fire me, and I don't even know why. I would just start worrying about why people were trying to fire me all the time. Why? Because I had to deal with a dad like this my whole life. So, getting more to the point, love of the world, love of money, and the hatred of God. Now, here's the interesting thing. My dad doesn't necessarily hate God. He's not like an atheist or anything like that. He just has nothing to do with God. He'll tell people he's Christian to those who want to hear that he's Christian, but there's literally no evidence to show that anyway. But the love of money is so obvious. And what's really crazy is so many people around him will be like, well, I don't know if he's saved or not. And all that weird Christian talk. And I'm like, it's obvious this man loves money more than God. And you know what Jesus said about that. Why are you guys so bad why are you so blind and so slow to be able to see this? And I'll tell you why. They have not gone through the ringer like I have. I have got no patience and no time for these people who love money more than God. None. Because I've been on the receiving end. Jesus gave a parable about a man named Lazarus who was poor, and the dogs licked his sores as he waited for the table scraps of a rich man's meal, and he fought with the dogs for the table scraps. Jesus says in this parable, and it may have been a true story, we never know with this parable. I have a suspicion that many of his parables were actually true stories, but he's telling the story just to let you understand the way it works. He said that when the poor man died, the poor man was taken to heaven and in God's love and his compassion, his mercy. Because blessed are you who are poor, the kingdom of God belongs to you. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your comfort. Now, he's not talking about spiritual blessing like all these fake Christians like to try to bend so they can keep their love of money. No, he's talking about actually worldly wealth. Woe to you who are rich, for you've received your comfort now. It's the same word he uses later on when he talks about wealth, and not in a spiritual way. He says that the rich man dies and goes to hell. And when he's in hell, he's so hungry and he's so thirsty. He begs for a drop of water. You see, that man, that rich man, his punishment, and his fair and just punishment, was he has to feel what he has done to others in his life. He had to feel what that poor man had to feel, that poor man's whole life. Where he was responsible. He could have made a difference. He could have done something for that man, but he chose to turn to a cold shoulder. Whether he wanted to think there was no God, it didn't matter. The bottom line is, he ignored that man who was put into his life, as Jesus talks about in other analogies, in other parables, about what you were given, you are responsible for using well. What did you use it for? If you were given money, did you use it on whores and drugs? That's just as bad as not using it. Well, you could even argue worse. But the point is, you didn't use it for what you should have used it for. This is what some people like to do to try to get out of the guilt of helping others. Yeah, it's amazing how much people will do to avoid helping another person. It's amazing how much they do not want to be loved by God. They'll go and they'll buy things they don't need, expensive boats, another truck, another vehicle. They'll collect things. They always collect things. They have collections of things. Meaningless crap that they don't need. They collect it. They spend money into things, vanities, that they do not need. And that is a mistake. Do you think the judge is going to care when you have to give your case? You have to give your case to God and say, I didn't have the money for that, man, because I just got another truck. I got another thing to add to my collection. Do you think he's going to care? Now, how are you going to feel when you find out that that was his child? That was somebody that he loved. Do you think he's going to be happy with you? No, he's not. Jesus describes hell as a place of great weeping and gnashing of teeth, a place of great regret and sadness. When people see themselves through God's eyes, they will weep. They will see a child not fed, and they chose to feed their vanity instead. So I'm warning whoever is listening to this, the penalties are severe for disobeying Jesus on these accounts. If you are given resources, it's for a reason. It's up to you to figure out what it's for. And I know, having lived under the poverty limit my whole life, I know most of the time the default thing is to think, this must be for me. But for people who've already got their lives pretty much made, and they then come into resources, you should be saying, who is this supposed to help? What I'm saying is it's totally natural to want to survive, to have a home, to be able to, and I don't mean a gaudy home or a gaudy car. I mean something reasonable, practical, low cost. It's not a burden. It's not expensive. Just something that gets it done. Okay? Because again, it goes right back to that vanity thing, the collecting things, having to have nice things so you feel like you're better than other people. That's what it's all rooted in. It's rooted in ego, in vanity. A person wants a nice car so they can say, I deserve a nicer car than your average person because I'm better than the average person. Therefore, I should have a nicer car than your average person. That's why they do it. They're so afraid to be seen as less than the average person because of their ego. And they're a slave to their ego. And that pride is going to keep that person in hell. Many times I've talked about how pride is the root of all sin. If you look at any sin, you can trace it back to pride. Okay, if I remember right, no. There are some that are actually not. Some are just madness and has nothing to do with pride. But madness aside, okay. Adultery. You don't care how the other person is going to feel that's going to get cheated if you're one of the people doing the cheating. You don't care how the other person in the relationship is going to feel. You don't care. You feel like you're better than them. It doesn't matter what they feel. You're going to do this. Taking something from somebody that they need. You don't care how they're going to feel. You just feel like you're better than them. You don't care how they feel. Pride, it's seeing yourself as greater than others. Murderous anger, same thing. You don't care about the consequences. You feel like this person is nothing. You are devaluing them and by putting yourself on a pedestal. Anger, murderous thoughts, same thing. Murder, same thing. Almost every sin is traced back to pride. If you can eliminate your ego, if you can eliminate your pride, you have taken the root of why you sin away from yourself. And I highly recommend you do this if you want to leave your life of sin as Jesus told us to do so. But let's get back to the subject of money. I've said many times, you can either have you can either have money or you can have empathy, but you can't have both. I want to talk about the one chapter in the Bible, Matthew 19. It's a chapter, probably one of the least referred to chapters. No, actually Matthew 17 is probably the least referred to one, where Jesus asks Peter about, does a king collect taxes from his own children or other people's children? He's like, well, other people's children, because they're waiting to pay the temple tax, or they're talking about paying the temple tax, meaning tithing, having to pay for religious purposes. And Jesus is basically saying God doesn't need your money. But he said, but in order to keep the peace, let's just go ahead and do it anyway. Churches won't tell you about that. God doesn't need your money. The other issue is Matthew 19, where a wealthy man comes to a young man, which means he inherited the money, most likely. And he comes to Jesus, and he starts off by belittling Jesus. He calls him good teacher, so we already know he does not see Jesus as the Messiah or anything like that. Which now we know from the beginning, anybody who has enough understanding knows that this is somebody who does not belong to God. Right from the get-go, this is a man who he's heard of miraculous signs and he's heard of the teachings, but he decides, no, this isn't the Messiah. This is just a guy who's just a good teacher. So he belittles Jesus. He does not acknowledge him as Lord, does not see him who he is, calls him good teacher, and then proceeds to lie and go on and say he's kept the commandments his whole life. Now, we know that's not true. He's basically claiming to be without sin. This man was very satanic, very self-righteous, belittles Jesus. The guy may as well have been Satan himself. Who knows if he had anything to do with Jesus' death? You know what I mean? Like, he's one of probably the people who lined up with the Pharisees and everybody else to backstab him. But this rich young man comes wading through the crowd of unwashed masses. I'm sure people who have missed meals and so on, but he's coming, probably smelling like nice perfume, had all of his meals, justifying himself to God, to his judge, to his king, belittles his king, and goes on to tell his king about how good of a person he is. And then he says, after saying, he's kept the law since he was a child, is there anything else that I lack to go to heaven? And Jesus says, you lack something. Now, Jesus intentionally does not tell him what it is that he lacks. And I'll get to that after finishing what he says. He says, you lack something. He says, sell your wealth, give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. But the rich man walked away and basically shook his head. He wouldn't do it. And Jesus then says to his apostles, how hard it is for a wealthy man to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through a tiny little hole the size of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven. And then, like Peter with his classic, well then who then can be saved? He said that so many times, it's silly. Who then can be saved? When I was younger, I took this in the literal sense that there are no wealthy people in heaven. I experienced something during this process, however, that caused me to change that, to really be more accurate to what Jesus said. Before I get to that, the thing that the man lacked was empathy. He had no concern for anyone else but himself. He had no empathy for others. You could either have empathy or you can have money, but you can't have both. If you had empathy and you had money, your money would go away. Your wealth would go away. This is why everybody who's rich lacks empathy. You ever notice that trend? And I'm not talking about the people who give some petty amount of percentage of their money away for tax write-off purposes. That is not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus says, liquidate your wealth, basically. Everything you don't need, give it to those who do need it, and then come and follow me. That's what Jesus taught. Jesus was not a capitalist. That's why the early church was a commune. They were communists. They shared resources. They made sure nobody was lacking. It was actually communism working successfully. Now, all your classes will teach you that communism can never work. It actually did in the first century, the early church. It did. You just got to have people who are not evil and greedy. Because, like I said, if a country calls itself communist, but you still have anybody who's rich or poor, then they're not good communists. They're not very good at being communists. So, I don't want to get on a side subject about how Jesus was not a capitalist. He was not a pig, and he taught communism. I don't want to get off on that subject. I want to get back to the whole subject of love of money, love of God, etc. Jesus also says that the love of money is deceptive. It will deceive you. You will begin to bend how you hear things to accommodate the money that you have or the money that you're going to have. There's some people, they're really pathetic. They're wannabe Bill Gateses. I once had a roommate like this. His business model, okay, he was like, I don't know, 21, 22. I was in his early to mid-20s, and he always bragged about how he's going to be the next Bill Gates. And you know what his $1 billion idea was? He was going to start a computer repair company. That's right. Best Buy's already doing it 1,000,000 times better than him. He just repairs laptops in his own time, but he wants to start a computer repair business. Wow. Yeah. Good luck with that. Anyway, so he's an example of somebody who is a clown, a fool, and a wannabe rich person. So he doesn't necessarily have money. He's not rich, but he's a wannabe rich person, which is, in my opinion, in some ways worse. He wants to go to hell. He wants to be judged. Yeah, the love of money was strong with that one. With him, he was just an atheist, though. He didn't believe there was a God, so he just figured this was just a game, and money was just points, and you just try to use as many points before you die. It's sad. It's really sad. He was a fool. He was a fool on many levels. From his wannabe Bill Gates business model of being... I'm sorry, it's just... Because that was in the mid-2000s, so like computer repair was a thing, you know what I mean? Like it was everywhere at every Best Buy, and other business, it's just so ridiculous. Windows as an operating system for computers being completely new was revolutionary, and that's why Bill Gates became so rich, because he realized, every operating system would need, or every computer would need an operating system. He realized he would have a percentage of every computer sale, and there'd be a computer in every home, etc. So Bill Gates had an innovative idea, and that's what made him as wealthy as he was. But to repair computers, so I'm just, for anybody who doesn't know anything about Bill Gates or how he got rich, I just wanted to do a quick, so you can see how my roommate was ridiculous and was foolish, so I could justify that statement. He was foolish. Almost everything he said was foolish. Anyway, don't want to get off subject. There was, as I moved out here, a relative of my sister's husband. His mom helped pay for the house to buy out here, and I was amazed she spent $25,000 to make up for the difference for what the seller wanted for the house and what my brother-in-law got for an inheritance for a house. Because, and reasonably, they didn't want a mortgage, and I totally get that. But I was just really amazed at how his mom did that. And his mom lives in a nice home. It's paid off. Her husband was a head of surgery at Kaiser Permanente for a while. So she had some money. You could tell it's a nice house, that kind of stuff. And so initially when I came in, what's strange is when I first came to that house, I didn't get the feeling of judgment. I just didn't. A lot of times when you go to people's houses, I guess it's very subtle things like how many SUVs they have in their parking lot or something like that. Something that kind of gives you this feeling like this person is a pig, But I didn't get that feeling when I even came to her house. But then I just had a hard time thinking, I don't know why, but I just feel like it's okay for her to have this money. I don't know why. I found out later why. I'll tell you. So come out here, and I'm looking for somewhere to live and so on, because I just don't want to go back to that trailer. It's where I lost the dogs, and it would be a disaster for me to be out in those woods again, but by myself without the dogs. And so I was looking for somewhere to start here. So I also want to tell you more details about this so you can understand that this was not necessarily out of the kindness of his heart. I think it was out of the kindness of his mom's heart, because she didn't have to do this. But anyway, so they combine the resources, they buy the house. It's now an investment. They now have a property, okay? And the plan was I was supposed to rent it. The problem is that they hit me with rent that I couldn't afford. I'm -2. It's $800 a month. I can afford $612 a month for rent. And I'm right back to where I was back in the California house. Right back to where I was. And so now, and this is where I'm sure many people will disagree with me, but listen to and take each issue one at a time. Earlier I made the claim that rent is immoral, that rent is basically slavery. One person works and the other person takes the fruit of the labor. And I've noticed that most of the people that are all for rent are people that have never had to pay rent. Or they have, but they just want to take their turn now. It reminds me of like this one play where this one character was a slave in the Roman Empire, and he was a slave most of his life, and he's like, oh, I hate being a slave so much. I can't wait to be free so I could have my own slaves. He didn't see that connection. See, he had no empathy. He couldn't see the connection behind how terrible it is to be a slave, how terrible it is to do this to somebody. But once I'm out of it, then I'm going to do it to somebody else. It's like a typical kid gets bullied, and instead of not bullying the next generation, he comes and he's a bully anyway. He then bullies kids when he gets bigger. It tells you he deserved it. He didn't learn the lesson, and he has no empathy. Same with the fictional slave character in that play who, oh, I hate being a slave so much, and then I just can't wait to have slaves myself. I have never once thought about ever buying a property for the purpose of renting. There is no hypocrisy in what I'm saying. I wouldn't say anything that I can't live by. I have lived under the evil of rent for long enough. Jesus said that when you lend money, to not ask for anything in return. He's either referring to interest or he's referring to the entire loan itself. Now, we all would probably think that would be pretty ridiculous. So he's probably referring to the interest. And our entire banking system and credit system and everything is based on interest, which is a sin. Jesus said not to ask for anything in return. To do the opposite of what Jesus says is disobedience. This is why our world is based in slavery. Slavery never ended, it just expanded. I hate to give you that update. I know all those 4th of Julys he celebrated, you're sure we're free. I mean, the fireworks say so. No, we're not. Slavery just expanded. Sorry to tell you this. Anybody who works jobs on the ground level of life has known this. And rent is just your slave quarters. You just choose where your slave quarters are. That's all it is now. You're free to be a slave with either this company or that company. That's not freedom. So back to the situation. So I want to talk about. Oh yeah. So the lady. So what happened? She was willing to front $25,000, and I was really amazed by that. I didn't even think a person would do something like that. I was amazed. And then I finally understood why when I walked into that house of hers, big expensive house, why I felt like it's okay that she has this. If you remember when Jesus is allowing that lady to use that expensive perfume on him just not long before he's arrested and taken and all that stuff. And Judas is the one rebuking Jesus, in a sense judging Jesus and saying, why are you basically allowing this? We should sell this perfume and give it to the poor. And Jesus says, oh, just let her, basically. Just let her. It's a nice thing she wants to do. You're not always going to have me. This is a reminder to all of us that God can do what he wants. And I wouldn't say that this is hypocrisy here. It's that he can do what he wants. And that sometimes some things go beyond simple understanding. Like what was going on in that woman's mind and heart. How she felt the want to do this. And that tells you that in most cases that's what they would do, though. They would take something like that, like expensive perfume, and they would sell it and they'd give it to the poor. So that was a one-time exception that Jesus just allowed. And I don't know, maybe Judas scuffled off in his self-righteousness, or maybe because he had his hand in the purse, he was upset that they didn't sell this. I think it was like $30,000 or $40,000 equivalent worth of perfume, and they didn't just sell it because he was going to take a cut of that, I'm sure. So he was mad he didn't get his money. And that's one of the things, I guess, that the apostles suspect for motive behind why he betrayed him. Money. Again. And then later Judas had regrets for having betrayed him for money in his 30 silver pieces. Judas is a very extreme. He's a different case. He was definitely the kind of person to think he's got a better idea how to do it than God. Play God, judge God. It's dangerous to do that. It's what a lot of atheists do when they start judging, or there's mosquitoes, therefore there's no God. Assuming that God made this as a world to experience pleasure, and God's not very good at making a world they like, not realizing that's not the purpose of this world. So they judge God. They say God's bad because there's mosquitoes, not knowing what the purpose of this world is. Always pointing to the child with cancer, saying, see. Not knowing what the purpose of this life is. Not knowing that Jesus literally said that in heaven there is no more sickness, suffering, crying, pain, or death. There are no goodbyes in heaven. And that's what he came here for, so that we can go there. He didn't come here and say, oh wow, you're right. The Father did a terrible job, just terrible job of decorating here. He already knew this world is the way that it is. But there's something better. But these kind of people, they like to judge God. It is, again, satanic. It's pride. They think that they are better than God. Don't do it. Don't judge God. Back off and just say, I don't understand. It's much safer than to start saying, oh, I get it. Oh, and I get it way better than God. Like the response that, God says to Job when he says, did you build the foundations of the earth? Were you there at the beginning? Do you have any idea how any of this works? No, you don't. So be quiet is basically the response that he got. He didn't actually just tell him why things had to be, because it seems like God allows some people to know what that is on their own in their life, and others he does not, or at least not at that time. But back on subject. Churches don't like to talk about this because most of their pastors live in the biggest houses with the biggest cars, not knowing that if they follow Jesus' example, they would live in the cheapest cars, in the cheapest houses. That's right. Jesus said, if you want to be first, you have to be last. If you want to be, a big thing, a big shot, you have to serve. In his kingdom, in Jesus' kingdom, it's not like it is in this world. In this world, if you're the boss, you get paid the most. In Jesus' kingdom, you're the boss, you get paid the least. That's right. I miss the days when I lived out in Kentucky when it was just me and Toby going on walks. Some of those talks and recordings that I did were just great. just unrestrained Holy Spirit. I remember those walks and those talks. And I spoke like it didn't matter who heard me, that only God in heaven heard me. I didn't care who I offended. I wasn't trying to keep a friendship or a relationship with anybody. I didn't care. And I'm still there mentally. Not like that changed. I don't care about that. Thank God. But I'm telling you what I know is true from everything that I learned from what Jesus taught and from what the Holy Spirit has shown me. The love of money will make you blind. It will lead you down a rabbit hole of worshiping a false god. Your entire idea of who God is will go bad. The love of money leads to, and basically is, idolatry. Now, there are many Christians, or people who call themselves Christians, who have this problem with this love of money. But they think, and they've deceived themselves into thinking that they're still serving God. So here's one little way you know if that's true or not. One way you can have that be tested. And you don't have to go do this yourself. It will come to you in life. As life goes on, it will come to you. I've said many times, if you're not willing to give up a little, you're definitely not willing to give up all of it. So when Jesus commanded that man, that's right, he commanded that young rich man to give his wealth to the poor and then follow him. That man disobeyed. Man said, no, my money. Wouldn't obey him. Wouldn't obey Jesus. You know, Jesus at any time can tell you to give everything to someone, and if you want to remain in his kingdom, you have to do it. He wouldn't do it unless there was a good reason. That's the best part. The most wise, the Most High has the best reason, and there's a reason for it. So when he tells you to do something, it is for the best. How many people do you know who could give every dollar they had, could give everything that they had? Who would do that? In your heart, you know the answer. Very few. Oh, it'll be ugly when you can actually see what's invisible, when all things are revealed. It's going to be... You don't realize how narrow the path is to life and how broad the road is to destruction. And so little ways in life that test this is, are you unwilling to give a little? And if compassion moves you and you ignore the compassion, that's bad. Let me tell you something that happened before I left Kentucky, and I'm not. This is not to brag about anything. This was actually, I'm ashamed of how I handled this, and that's why I'm using this as an example. Okay. Now keep in mind, I have had, at this point in my life, I've had no income for 3 years. I lost my job. It was out in the middle of nowhere. There's basically nothing but just Walmart, and if they're not hiring, you're screwed. I had no income for 3 years. I was burning money up fast. I wasn't burning up fast, but the account was just, you know what happens when you don't have income for 3 years. I was taking Toby into town to get water, and I saw a homeless man sitting near the water thing. Now, he wasn't there at first, which was strange, because I'm usually aware of these things. But then near the end, when I was about to finish up the last bottle, he was sitting by the building that was just kind of right next to where I was getting water. And he seemed distraught. And so I felt like I needed to do something. And so we were near a McDonald's, and I couldn't remember how much meals were and all that, but I had some 10s and 20s and all, and I had some ones. I gave him my 3 ones, and what happened was I asked him, I said, "You doing all right?" And he wasn't. I realized I should have talked with him, and I didn't. I was busy. I know, I had things going on, and I didn't plan on it, but I regret not talking with him. I knew, even though he said it was okay, I knew it wasn't okay. And I said, did you need any money? He said, "No, that's okay." And so I ended up just giving him the $3 and said, "Well, have a nice day." And I got in my car, and as I left, I thought, no. I was driving home, and I thought I should have given him. I should have given those 5s and 10s. I should have poured it on. That man needed help. And later on, as I thought about it more, something happened in his life and he needed to talk with someone, and I did not take the time to do that. This isn't no way bragging. This is actually that's one of my regrets. I should have given him more, and I should have. Look, I didn't have much money to give, so what I could have really done is spent some time. I should have got Toby. Oh man, that would have been beautiful. That was in Toby's. That was in May. That was one of the last weeks I was with Toby. I would have loved it if I did that. Got Toby out of the car. For all I know, that man just lost his dog. I don't know what it was, but he was distraught. And I should have got Toby out of the car, and I should have sat down next to him, and I should have talked with him. But I was too busy at the time, in my mind, not knowing that was the purpose for that day. And the amount of money I gave him, sure, it's better than nothing, but it was also kind of slap in the face. What could you really buy with $3? Like a hamburger? Because I know that sometimes when you encounter people, they are angels in disguise. I know this. Like I said, I don't remember seeing that man anywhere. Maybe he was. Maybe just a ninja homeless man. A ninja hobo, okay? Maybe he was. And maybe he wasn't. Bottom line, God sees it either way. Whether it was an angel or not, God sees it either way, and it's the right thing to do. That was a little test, tiny test, about are you willing to give away a little? Because I tell you right now, if a person can't even give away $3 and they have an abundance, now I had no income. I was running out of money. It was hard to give away money when you've been in that state of scarcity for 3 years. Very hard. But I knew it's what my compassion was moving me to do, and I obeyed that, okay? And that's what I mean when I say if a person ignores that compassion, they are very likely hell-bound. And I don't care what they say their faith is or who they claim to preach to, or if they're a missionary. I don't care. If they get that wrong, everything is wrong, because their idea of who God is, they don't even know who God is, which is consistent with what Jesus said when he said that many people will come to me claiming me as their Lord, justifying themselves by what they've taught and what they've prophesied and what they've done. But he's going to say, I never knew you. They followed a false idea of who God was. How you view money and how you obey to compassion says everything. It's really sad when I see people who have no faith at all, agnostics and so on, being more generous and doing a better job of obeying what Jesus taught, love your neighbor as yourself, than people who call themselves Christians. Yes, this is a scolding. I'm tired of seeing this in America where people do not obey Jesus. You know why? They're distracted with Old Testament stuff. They're distracted with letters from Paul. They're distracted from all this noise. Jesus said, commandment number 1, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Commandment number 2, love your neighbor as yourself. That's it. If you can do that, you're in good shape. What good is it to call yourself a Christian or a disciple of Jesus if you don't do what he says? And he literally has said this in the Gospels. What good is it to say that you're this or that, but you don't do what he says? So I'm in a strange situation right now. I don't like it, but it's just the way that it is. Remember how I said life will throw you different tests? So the house that I'm in there's no mortgage, as I've explained. It's paid off. $100,000 of it came from my sister's husband's inheritance that was meant to go towards a house, so he put it towards a house. And $25,000 of it came from his mom. Now he made the remark, and keep in mind they're missionaries in India, so this is kind of surprising when I say this. And I wish I could give a full picture of this person so it doesn't seem off, but it is important for this subject, for what I'm talking about. When they were arguing about whether or not they should buy a house, he was very much against the idea of buying the house initially, and my sister was very much for it. And he made the remark, well, I'm not doing it if it's not making money. That is a very worldly thing to say. And it's also very revealing of what's going on in the inside. I would never say something like that. I don't think like that, and so I would never. And I'm not a missionary, you know. So we're now entering into kind of like the Twilight Zone with a guy who is not a missionary, who is an agnostic for 10 years, would never find himself making a remark that would be so obviously cold and disobedient. And the person who is a missionary does make this. Now, look, we're all not perfect. We all say things dumb, and we do things, and that's why I want to give some slack here. But I want to say this though, right now. He's under a test right now. He is being tested. His mom was tested, and she passed. She can keep all the money she wants. Jesus said, "What you've done for the least of these brothers of mine, you've done for me." Jesus also said, "What you have not done for the least of these brothers of mine, you have not done for me." His mom was willing to unload $25,000 so a person could have a home. I know it's property. It'll eventually come back if they sell the house, etc. I know it's not like she just gave the money, and but she it's still a big. I've never seen anything like that in my life, anyway. But her son now is under the test, and we'll see how this goes, because like I said, if a person is not willing to give up a little, then they are not willing to give up all of it if they were commanded. And he's not even having to give something. Oh, I didn't even explain what's happening. So I told my sister yesterday and this morning, I gave her a copy of my budget, my income, my expenses, everything, so she can understand that I am negative $188 a month living out here in Kansas at $800 rent towards them. I told her, however, if it's $612 a month, I'm at a break-even budget to live in Kansas. Just so she understands that it's not sustainable for me to stay out here. They know how hard it would be for me to go back to that trailer in Kentucky. They know. That's where my dogs were. And it would be, I never lived a second of my life out there without them, without Toby. And so it would be very difficult for me to go back so soon. But that's where I'm left at if they don't change the rent rate. I simply cannot afford to stay out here for very long if they don't change the rate. I figured I would just, full disclosure, tell them everything that's going on and just give it to them. The monthly costs on the house are about $300 a month for the property tax and the insurance. So you understand the bottom, the floor, before they're losing money and paying for me to stay here. So it has to be at least $300. So what I'm asking them is, can they only profit $312 a month on this rather than $500 a month, basically, is what I'm asking. Can they profit a little less on this house just so I can break even? If he's not willing to give up on potential profit of about $188 a month, then I'll know that he, and not just I, but everyone in heaven will know he has a love of money more than God. It's through these little situations and tests that, and it's not that God tests people. God already knows all things. He knows what's in a person's heart. It's that these situations are testing and allows us to know what a person was made of. If you have enough discernment, you can look at a testing situation and say, I see. I don't like having to be in these situations because I saw the very ugly side of it with my dad. I saw a guy who, when he kept raising the rate to impossible numbers, especially when it was $1,400, I told him I don't even have that in the bank. I don't have a job. I'm about to move to Kentucky in a couple months once the settlement clears. And I told him, I have nowhere else to go. Where am I going to go? And he said, not my problem, is what he said. Where are me and my 3 dogs going to go? He said, not my problem. I've had to see the very ugly side of people who love money more than anything. Not just God, but anything. It's really unpleasant to have to see the evidence, the damning evidence. A lot of the times we go through life and we just kind of wear blinders to this and we just kind of hope for the best for people that we meet and see. But it's really ugly when you get to actually see why a person is going to hell. And he has not changed his heart or mind. It's been more than 11 years since that point. I was in Kentucky for 11 years, so yeah, it's been like 11 and a half years, I think, since that point. He has not changed his heart or his mind. There has never been a mention of, hey, I'm sorry for evicting you and for threatening to sue you for that money. And I'm sorry for taking all that money from you all those years, even though the house is paid off, and leaving you with nothing to live out in the trailer. I'm sorry for selling your childhood home so you can never come home. I'm sorry for wasting all the money on cruise ships and vacations to Europe. I'm sorry. None of that. In his mind, my money. I'm justified to do whatever I want with my money. Well, he's going to have to tell that to the judge. What you've done to the least of these brothers of mine, you've done to me. And what you have not done for the least of these brothers of mine, you have not done for me. And he had to take trips to Holland is not going to fly in court. I hoped for many years he would have a change of heart, and I hoped that he would find forgiveness, but he refuses to admit to having done any wrong. He still has his love of money, even though it's taken him to an empty place in life. So, that's it. You know, I really don't like having to see this side of people. I really don't. And my whole life I've been used as like an investigator. Or not even that. I'm like actually I'm like an undercover operative to like get the confession or get the evidence. And it's so awkward to see it. And so I really have high hopes for my sister's husband. I really do. I hope that he's like his mom. Even a fraction of him being like his mom. I mean, because his mom did way more. Way more. She gave up resources to make this happen. He would just have to be giving up potential profit. You know, as the house appreciates in value and goes up in value. The previous guy who sold it made very little money on the actual rent money. He made most of his money from just how much the property went up in value from when he bought it to when he sold it, you know. So what I'm saying is, just me being here, keeping the yard cut and the house cool, is actually value in and of itself. The actual values, anyway. We'll see what happens. Okay, but enough about me. I want to get back on subject. It's just my own what's going on lately about love of money and stuff. Because listen, you've got people who they do the weirdest things to try to feel like they're going to heaven while keeping their love of money, and they'll do things like be religious, go to lead a church. What am I saying? Go to a church. Lead a church. Be a missionary. They'll do these things so they can keep their love of money or whatever it is. And that's exactly why Jesus says there's going to be a lot of people at judgment claiming him as their Lord and then justifying themselves by what they've done. I was a missionary. I was a pastor. I taught this. I prophesied that. So what? You didn't even know who God was. You worshipped an idol your whole life. The God you worship thought it's okay to turn a cold shoulder and a blind eye. The God you worship said it's okay to have a big fat bank account and not care about anyone but yourself. That's an idol. That is the devil. You are worshiping the devil as your God. When he lies, he speaks his native language. And what did Jesus say about money? It is very deceptive. It's really cool, those scenes like from the Hobbit. How I really like how stories interweave moral truths that we know, like about how greed is deceptive and this sort of thing. And dragon sickness, you know. And how it'll change a person, how money can change a person, and great money can greatly change a person, and so on. I know, some people say, oh no, it just reveals what was already there. It's another debate for another time. But we definitely notice a big change, whether it was there from the beginning and just exposed by wealth, or where it actually changed them. It's just cool. I always think about dragon sickness in the Hobbit whenever I deal with issues when people just love money more than anything. Now, as that whole adventure went on, no harm came to me as I was undercover. Other than working at those hateful jobs for all those years, that stunk. Okay, so some harm did come to me, but I mean, like permanent harm in the long run. No, God provided. I actually really enjoyed my time in Kentucky in the trailer, and so it worked out for me, even though my dad was the way he was. And I got to have faith right now that as much as I've gotten attached to being in an actual house, let me tell you, this is the first time I've been in a house in more than 11 years. Like a house with a real roof and like it's insulated. Man, in the summertime when the AC's on, this house can stay cool so easily. It's amazing. I can only imagine how warm it stays in the wintertime too. I am used to living rough. out in that trailer, okay, in the summertime, I'd have to sit in front of the window AC. And anywhere in the house, it was basically 90 degrees. I mean, I just sat in front of that window AC with just boxers in the summertime. And in the wintertime, I wore all my clothes and I'd sit in front of the electric heaters. And that toilet seat was a block of ice. It'd make you lose any desire to take a two the moment you sat on it. It was pain. I mean, just so many things. Even just trying to get warm. The first 10 minutes of laying anywhere, whether in the bed, the couch was better because it was less of it was touching the ground, but in a bed or anything like that. And how cold those sheets were in the wintertime, man, and how it took so long just to get warm. And seeing your breath in the house and the power going out for days at a time. It was like camping for 11 years. So to come to this house now, I've been spoiled these last couple months, and now it's like, man, if I'm going to have to go back to Kentucky, it's even worse now because I'll be going back without the dogs and knowing how life could be better in a house rather than a trailer. But you know what? It's sooner or later. If I stay here, I run out of money. Then I got to go back, or at least I go back now or soon, and not be a prisoner in the house saying I can't even go to Chick-fil-A to get a meal because I'm so broke. I'm too poor. So I can't even afford to flush a toilet. You know what I mean? So anyway, enough about me. Let's try to get back to the sermon, even though this is going on. 1 hour. I'm gonna keep going. Back in the day, and when I was in Kentucky and I'd do walks and be on the patio, I do 1.5 hour sermons easy, and without babbling about myself all the time. It was pretty cool. I already miss those days, even though those days were like 4 months, 5 months ago. I do miss those days. I do. Okay, so what could be done about this? So I pointed out a massive problem, right? Like most people, but then I don't offer any solutions. Wow, the first thing coming to mind is not practical, but sometimes a person has to live on the receiving end of that greed to begin the process of saying, "Hey, this hurts. I didn't know this hurt so much until I had to receive it. Yeah, this hurts. I know that's not practical. What I'm gonna say is, some people may not like it, but some people are just not meant to go to heaven. I know it's brutal. I'm being real. Some people are born snakes and some people are born puppies, and God can see it from the beginning what they are and where they're going. We don't. We get that mystery, and we don't really get to know that, or at least most people don't. They live most of their lives blind, have no discernment. They can't tell the difference between a young snake and a young dog, but some people do. But sometimes there's not much you can do. That's not the answer you probably wanted to hear. But if a person has no sense and has no empathy, these are things that you cannot. It's like the saying, like the t-shirt, you can't fix stupid. There are just some things that you can't fix. Some people are cold-hearted because it's like a disorder that they have. Like if they're psycho, they're psychotic. You can't just or narcissist. You know, there's no cure for narcissism, right? There's no cure for these things. This is their personality. It's who they are. Let's just say some people are born snakes and other people are born puppies. It's not the answer you wanted, but I'm trying to think of an answer about what about people who are not necessarily psychotic and all that. There are a lot of young people who are simply just, they haven't experienced enough life to know better. They kind of get a pass, but where their pass runs out is when they have experienced life enough to know better and they've chosen wrong. Like that slave in the play who basically says, "Oh, I hate being a slave so much. I can't wait till not be a slave so I can get my own slaves." That's what I'm kind of talking about. People who have gone through the ringer, have experienced the pains of sin, but have not repented from it, have not seen how it's wrong and gone the other way, had been a victim of bullying and then decided, I will never be a bully. And instead, just decided to be a bully. It's just a personal thing. It's who God is at work with or not. And you can't really do much about that. You can avoid snakes though. It's a good idea. I just hope for my brother-in-law's sake that he he makes the right choice. I really do. He was teaching a false theology about how money is like, he's teaching that you can have as much money as you want just as long as you don't put your trust in money. He didn't understand that verse I talked about, when Jesus talked about you lack something, it's not that man didn't lack a trust in God. He lacked empathy. And my brother-in-law did not understand that. He thought it was trust in God. It's not trust in God. It's empathy. Empathy is the root of the law. Empathy is what would cause a person to give up their wealth to the poor because they felt compelled to do so. It's nothing to do about, I can give the wealth to the poor because I trust God. I'll get my money back. No, that's not what it is, and that's not why you do it. And you're not going to see it back. That's why Jesus said, give it away, give your wealth to the poor. You're not getting it back. It's not about trust. But many times I heard him talking to people about how, you can have all the money you want, you just can't put your trust in it. You got to put your trust in God. That's not true. And so that tells me that if that's what he's teaching, then there is most likely, there's a lot of other things that aren't true going on in the background. That's disturbing. It's going to be between him and his wife, my sister. It's probably going to be an argument, a fight. I'm not trying to divide families, but Jesus did say that he is here to divide families, brother against sister and husband against wife. So I'm just making choices. I'm trying to survive, okay? I'm trying to survive Toby's loss. I'm trying to develop a life with dignity and try to live, In that process, it has put them into a situation that's testing. And like I said, Jesus said he's not here so everybody gets along. He will divide people on issues and matters. Father against son and brother against brother, he will divide people. So it's very testing. It's very testing. It feels like this is a good place to end for me because I'm really tired now. But I don't want to end. I'm just sitting here on the couch now. I'm not standing anymore or pacing or anything like that. Now I'm just sitting on the couch hanging out. We came up in a culture that from a very young age we were taught to love money. Grades in school. Points. Grades. Points led to kind of ranking in your grade level. Top of your class, valedictorian, that kind of stuff. And so from a young age, we work for the approval of older people. We're taught to be obedient to the people in charge. We regurgitate information that they want us to hear, or they want to hear from us, memorizing things and spitting it back. Years later, you don't even remember it. You just short-term memory. It was more about obedience. I've always said that school is about obedience, not about knowledge. The whole thing is set up for obedience. But it's also about points. And points is money. So we live in a society that really engineers people to just work for numbers. To be a slave to money. It's wrong. It's wrong. Those 11 years I had with my dogs, I didn't really talk about this, but I think I need to because it's something more positive now. I worked as much as I needed to live. I mean, the jobs didn't pay much out there, so that was harder to do than you might think. But I don't think my bank account went over $1,000 like the whole time I was out there. I think I hovered around $500 like the whole time I was out most of the time. Now, there was a time I worked in a hospital for a little bit, and it did go up for a bit into the thousands, but it was not common. I mean, most of the time I was out there. The first 5 years, I worked at a pet store, and I wrote stories, and I worked on board games, and I played Team Fortress 2. Good game, fun game. And I enjoyed my time with my dogs. Money was not even a factor in my life. And I'm telling you, those are the happiest years. Sorry, I'm going to get emotional. Those are the best years of my life. And I felt God's love. There was no love of money. the blessings that you can even feel in this life for having been set free from money is immense. When you see money as just a means to an end, just I need this much to live and that's it, and it's not some thing to work for or some goal. There's so many young men that they're taught through the red pill community the evils of this world. That doesn't have to be this way too. This world doesn't have to be this way. They're taught that basically, if you want love in your life, if you want a woman, you have to make money. Women only want money. If you don't have money, if you're broke, you have to be a model. And if you're not a model and you don't have money, you're done. Women don't want you. You don't deserve love. You have to work for love. You have to work for a prostitute, basically, is what they teach in this world. And that was so depressing. Later, when I was in Kentucky, I started to take some of those red pills, and I kind of spat some of them out because, look, I'm not saying what they're saying is not true. Like, I know that a lot of people are shallow like this, and I know the world is like this, but you shouldn't react to it in the way they teach you. You shouldn't be a slave to women by trying to accumulate money just so women will like you. It's one of the things I never understood. I know I'm changing subject a little bit, but it does come back eventually. They would basically teach you to, just don't make women a factor as to why you do anything. If you follow your purpose, they'll follow you, which is basically like saying, if you want women, just pretend like you don't want women. Just pretend like you're not obsessed about women, even though you still are. Still do things with women as a goal. You want women, you have to have money. And this is something I'm going to tell you right now, and it is true. If you, like me, live like a monk out in the woods for 11 years, women are going to be repelled by you. They might like you, they might still be attracted to you, but they will not be in a relationship with you. You are not relationship material, as one of them told me. I don't see you as marriage material, as one of them told me before she went off with this rich guy. It's just the way it is. It's biology. I don't know. I mean, you might luck out and find a woman who's not materialistic like this, but good luck. Good luck to you. Truly, good luck. You'd be finding something rare, but it's true. A lot of women are like this. And this is another way that engineers men to be so materialistic minded. Now, an interesting thing about our cultural trend is that men are realizing that women's standards have become unreachable. They're so high now that you can never make a woman happy. You can never really attain what was so easy to do in the 80s and 90s. And so men have just opted out, and they just aren't working anymore. They're not doing anything anymore, because if there's no family, no woman, there's no point to working. Why provide for a family when you don't have a family? Why not? You could just, like Dave Chappelle said, you could just live in a box now. And so it's sad that in our culture we have tied being accepted by the opposite sex. For men to be accepted by women, you have to have money. And if you want to be attracted to her, you have to have a lot of money then. I mean, all the woman has to do is just not be fat, basically, is all she has to do. She doesn't have to have a sense of humor. She doesn't have to have game. She doesn't have to have money. She can just not be fat and she'll be all right. But a guy, he has to have all that to do remotely well, and it's very burdensome. Man, I miss my dogs. I know. I'm just. It's not just that I miss my dogs. I miss that time. I moved out there in 2013, and it wasn't as bad as like the late teens or early 20s, as when culture really has gotten bad. I just miss the simplicity of those times, and I wonder. Yeah, I was thinking, can I go back to it? Yes, I can, but before I do, I'm going to have to do some serious work on being able to accept the loss that I've just gone through. I should probably end this sermon now. I'm just going into personal therapy here. Maybe someone could benefit from this as I talk this through, though, because I am talking about motivations, why you do things, and being set free. You'll hear it in church that Jesus is here to set you free. You don't hear it too often, though. Jesus said that his yoke is easy, his burden is light. And yet, why is it so many religious people seem so heavily burdened? Like they have to be a missionary, they have to travel all the way across the world to convert somebody. Like, why does they feel so burdened now? Why does they feel like they have to work for God's love now all of a sudden? Because they're used to it since school, since trying to find an opposite, a mate of the opposite gender. they're used to having to work for love in their life. Some of these kids had emotion, like I had an emotionally detached dad. My mom was the only one I was close with, and she passed when I was 21. It was very dark. I don't want to get into it, but my dad, there was no connection there, and so there's constantly, I think, for people like in this situation, you feel this, you have to work for love. And so that then translates then over to God. You feel like you have to work to be loved by God. You know, my dogs never had to work for me. They never did a thing for me. They were bums. They sat on the couch and they ate the food I bought them. I bought them good food. I spent money on their food despite having like no money. I got them decent food. And they sat around the house all day and I loved them. Do you know the relationship between God and his children is very similar, much more than a relationship with a person and his dog than it is a person and their human child? Because a human child will grow up to be equal to that adult, but a dog will never grow up to be equal to the human. And this is why I say the relationship between a human and a dog will always be more divine. It will always be more representative of the relationship between God and human. And we are, for those who belong to Jesus as Father, we are his children. Just as my dogs were my children to me. Even though the world will say that will shake their head and think you're crazy, I don't care. I lived with them. I've lived alone my whole life, and I lived with Toby for 16 and a half years, and Jenna for her 13 and a half years, and Faith for her 9 years, okay? They were all my kids, okay? And they never had to work for that love. Okay? I'm sorry. And this is what matters in life, is what I'm trying to say. It's not all these lies and tricks and traps and these games that people play for points. It's a mental illness that people have, all for points. It all starts from childhood where they teach you to work for points and get more points than everyone else. And step on everyone else to be on the top. It's the top of the shame pile, I'll tell you that. When I was out in Kentucky with just the dogs, I looked at that shame pile from a distance and just shook my head and thought, these people are crazy. People on the top of the pile are just the top embarrassments. I'm glad I left that pile. That's what I thought when I was out there. It's unfortunate I had to go through so much hurt from loss to have to learn such valuable lessons. It's why I do these recordings, because I feel like although I benefited from these experiences in life and these lessons that have been learned, I feel like other people can benefit from them as well. We all go through difficulties, but not all of us really take the time to dissect lessons from it that were intended to be learned. And so I hope these are helpful. It's hard, you can go to churches, but still feel alone. You'll still have tons of people in there that still have their love of money, that still, it's the disturbing thing what I'm going to say, but there's a lot of people in Christian churches, and I visited a lot of churches from my time in Kentucky. I've only been to 3 churches out here so far, but I've also only been out here for like 2.5 months, so that's not bad, right? But I visited a lot of churches, and I'm just saying that there is a lot of idol worship in churches, and that many of the people who call Jesus their Lord don't know him. And so it's kind of bizarre to me that there's sometimes so much talk of going all the way across the world to try to save people over there when there's so many lost people over here. And you already know the language over here. But I understand it's difficult because this is where you grew up, and a prophet is not accepted in their own home. I get it. And also there's you're going to burn your bridge with or you're going to piss off family members, you're going to offend friends, I know. What did Jesus say about that though? That if you're not willing to give up friends or family members for my sake, then you don't deserve me. So that's something powerful to think about. If you value your relationship with somebody who worships idols more than God, you don't deserve God. In this way, I am very glad that God has stripped away everything from my life. That's a crazy thing. Couldn't you just leave Toby, right? Just for at least a couple more years, right? I'm glad that God took so much of this away because I'm not tied to it. Like right now, if I wanted to, this is weird. This is weird. Like that I even feel like I have to be at this house and I have to try to find a way to make it work at this house. Why? Oh, because everything led to this point. All the coincidences, everything, it led to this point, and it's close to town, and there's a church just down the road, and it would just be really cool, and I have to be here. No, I don't. If the finances don't provide, if the numbers aren't there, then God doesn't want me here. I'll go where I'm supposed to be. And if that's back to Kentucky, then that's where I'll go. And God, give me the endurance and the ability to go back to that trailer without the dogs. But I'm at this point where I'll go here, I'll go there. I go where God sends me. After having been here for a couple of months, it's amazing how quickly I got stuck into thinking I have to be here. Really? The numbers don't look like I have to be here. In fact, the numbers look like I can't be here. I just have to let go, don't I? I know this. When I had no home, and I'm going to get emotional saying this. No way I think I'm going to get through this without some emotion here. When my dad was pushing me out of my childhood home, asking for more money than I had, losing my world, that settlement that I got from my employer was unusually high for that kind of case. And it was just as much as I needed, exactly as much as I needed to buy that trailer cash. And my dogs and we smoothly moved across the country. It was a 48-hour drive. Me and my sister drove it nonstop, basically. We did stop somewhere, I think, for a couple hours to take a nap, but, otherwise, we didn't go to a hotel. We didn't really stop. When one slept, the other drove, but I did most of the driving. 48 hours, your butt hurts when you sit for that long, especially with everything packed into the car and 3 dogs in the back seat. God provided a way. That's what I was about to say. A way was made. Even though I was losing my home and everything I knew, and there was no way I could stay there anymore, a way was made. Even though I loved that house and I would have really liked to stay there, a way was made and I did something different somewhere else. And I grew out in Kentucky. Became a very free-willed, unobstructed person who could consider all things and think about all things and not be bound to trying to stay in line with my parents' theology or my friends or church groups. I could just think about whatever I want. And I could debate it myself and come to just be this very free-spirited person. And to experience joys I had never known were possible. Sorry. Just with my dogs out in the field. And knowing I had a roof over my head. And I wasn't a slave to anybody. Not to Walmart. Not to some idol. Not to some misconception of who God is. I wasn't a slave to anybody. God set me free. That's what I was talking about. How Jesus set me free. When people see these missionaries, do they see freedom? I can't speak for all missionaries. Okay, that's not fair. But if people see obligation and somebody feeling like this is what they have to do because they were commanded to do it, and Jesus said that his burden is light. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. Jesus also said something else about traveling halfway across the world, right? Yeah, for those of you who know the New Testament, you know what I'm talking about. That's right. Before you go somewhere, you should make sure you're going and serving God. Make sure it's God. How do you know if it's God? Is it consistent with what Jesus taught? Yes or no? I go where I'm sent. I go where I'm wanted. Jesus said when he sent his disciples out for a little bit, he said, if the town doesn't want you, then don't worry about it. Move on to the next. Go where you're welcome. Go where it's going to work. Don't fight against the current. Swim with the current. God opens a door, step through it. If he closes the door, don't struggle to try to open it. It was closed for a reason. I go where I'm sent. Kentucky for 11 years, and that I had a lot of good memories, but it was also hard, man, those winters and all those bugs. Oh my gosh. I got tick bites every year. I even got Lyme disease one year because of the tick bite. It was bad. Yeah, so that, and the snakes. I never got bit by any snakes. That was seriously divine protection. The dogs all got bit by the snakes. I never did. Even when I was disassembling this one bush, after Jenna had been bit by a copperhead twice within 10 days, I had it with this snake. I was going to find it and get rid of it. And so I was disassembling this bush, this big old 12 by 14 foot bush that was next to the trailer, because I had a feeling that the snake was sleeping under the leaves under this bush that was right next to the fence, and I think the dogs were sticking there. It was nighttime when they would come back with the snake bite, which was another mistake, is letting them out at night. But both times I think that they were sticking their head through the fence, and the snake was near the fence under the bush, so I ended up taking apart this whole thing. And after like 12 hours, I remember it was around 7 o'clock, the sun was going down, it was sunset. I had, when your shirt is so sweaty, it just sticks to you, and I was just sweaty, and it was just, humidity. It's Kentucky, and I think it was like summer or something like that. It was a summer evening. I was just taking a break. I was just like, look at this. I did this amazing job. All I had was a little saw, a little retractable saw, and I had to just cut each branch and drag it away. Cut each branch, drag it away. There were so many times I was kneeling around, crawling around, and all that, and then so there I am at the end of the day, looking at this great accomplishment of disassembling this beautiful flower plant, sadly. And I saw the copperhead move right next to my foot, and I jumped like Michael Jordan, and I could not believe that whole time I was there, it was just there. I was stepping on it, I was walking around it, I was kneeling around it. I mean, this thing could have had me any one of these times, and it did not bite me. And it really did make me believe in that verse about, not even snakes won't be able to strike you. I mean, it just for like 12 hours, man. But yeah, that's a lot of memories out there. A lot of good ones and a lot of difficult ones. And if I had to go back out there, yeah, sermon's over. This is my therapy. I should probably end this recording. I'm going to just keep recording in another one because I feel like it. But that's the end of this one. Don't love money. Till next time.